When I left Paris the first time, the summer of 2015, I embarked on a journey of self renewal and purpose, determined to forge a path that resonated with authenticity and integrity. As I navigated the twists and turns of this inner odyssey, I carried with me the wisdom gleaned from the vast expanse of Wyoming's wilderness and unmet expectations of the Sea of Cortez, the knowledge that true healing begins from within, and that only by confronting our shadows can we emerge into the light of self realization. In doing so, I sought to transcend the cycle of codependency and denial, embracing the full spectrum of my humanity and charting a course towards wholeness and fulfillment. With each passing mile away from the city of lights, and for me, illumination, I drew closer to the realization that my father's spirit lived not only in his ashes, but also in the resilience and strength that he instilled within me, guiding me towards a future imbued with purpose and meaning. As the train drew closer to Dax, France, a well researched but lesser touristed city near the French coast, I wondered why I had agreed to a work exchange with a surf company of a foreign company. Even with the understanding that Germany had little in the way of a surfing coast, it felt nationalistic alien to join a distinctly German owned and marketed surf company in France, especially as an American. Any fears I had were left to chance. My desire to give myself and my dad a new adventure held too much allure. If I failed, I always had my grief and my American ignorance to blame. Dangerously, I realized I was safe from even my own shame, and that if I were not careful, my idiot would consume my ego and would push me to a bottom there would be no up from. At that point, I needed to exercise the limits of self compassion and physical dedication in the relative newness of the surf experience for both myself and the ashes that I had just rededicated myself to. I baptized my intent anew in the waters of the Aquitaine and Atlantic coast. I did not make any abrupt changes, only moved forth with a renewed spirit that I would continue to make my way out of the rubble of my former self, all the while with the thought of my father's spirit being with me, not just my projection of me onto his charred remains. My growth was slow and deliberate. There were fewer mistakes, but still many misattunements to those that I thought to seek intimacy with in proxy to my father. This was not wholly a fault of my own, but rather the product of being enveloped into a transient culture akin to a summer camp for young adults, whose boozy nights led way to woozy, unapologetic avoidance in the light of day. Even for those who existed under the same flag in history, there seemed to be little loyalty in the light of day. I, as a Black American, stood little chance. Shallow social media friendships and promises to keep in touch felt superficial and without hope of ultimately lending to my healing. I felt that this was a character flaw and a result of my unhealed grief and questioning and questionable self worth. I spent my days in Aquitaine on the beach watching the competition or falling off surfboards, with my nights spent bartending, making jokes with the throngs of drunk Germans, and flirting unscrupulously. When the competition concluded, I was recruited as a camp chef for an inmate crew of 7 to 8 instructors. I spent my days back on my hours long runs through the pine forest and along the beach until I was sure there was no grief left to detox. I was all abs and endorphins. When the surf camp ended, and all of my ephemeral friendships dissipated to the dystopia in which head, heart, and ash were still in hand, I left for Germany to see if I could not unburden them to some promising proxy by way of those I met whose recent social media pledge had been exchanged. I think I must have associated my healing with that of thriving stamina and physical self discipline, and in crediting those individuals, I followed in codependent desperation. I arrived to Berlin by way of Hamburg. Hippie and industrial, I found the city to be manageable in its navigability and population. Given the size and history, I was somewhat surprised that it did not seem to be all that busy in terms of a large city. It felt laid back and had an unhurried pace, unlike Paris, that I found refreshing, as was the colder weather with the wind coming off the North Sea. I met up with a lover that I had taken on the coast of France. The easy intimacy was a most welcome distraction from my struggle to relate to others in and through my grief. I was eager to feel normal again. He was caring, kind, and one of the most handsome men I had ever seen in my life, film stars included. It was therapeutic. I felt validated and satisfied in nearly every way. We parted with no promises and no glances back. At least I did not. It was exactly what I needed in its easy unattachment. Berlin was pivotal. Intending to stay with a friend for only a week, I ended up staying for well over a month, with a break down to Munich to visit a friend of mine that I had not seen in 15 years. He was the brother of one of my best friends in boarding school, and had been a witness to my youthful vagabonding, a time in which I had lived out of my classic car with a bird for a summer, a cockatriel named Francis. His family had been kind enough to host me on some of those hottest days, and we shared endless laughter, lighting spliffs, and listening to underground hip hop, dub, and reggae. He himself was a musician, and I had the privilege of touring a gig or two with his popular German band the winter after the bird summer, when I was living in Austria for a spell. His birthday had brought him to Berlin to celebrate with some friends who had also rallied for the occasion. I slipped into the mix and disappeared into the bowels of the Berlin nightclubs for nearly a week before reality set in. I realized I was finding it hard to stop losing myself to the temptation of the nightlife and find the Ausgang, or even formulate a plan for how to leave or where to go. It was not that I had found my home. It was that I had given all agency over to the distracting hedonism of the city. I was not the only willing victim to the culture of the city, and no one, in the light of day, seemed to notice or care that my bleary eyes had gone unresetted for multiple days, so used to the torrid tourism that had come ostensibly for the city's rich history, and stayed for the myriad of ways that one could forget the history's tragedies. I met up with a friend from Montreal who happened to be passing through the city, and she and I wandered around until we met a man juggling alone on the street. He asked us if we wanted to see a magic trick, and while my friend hesitated, I did not. He wowed us with his sleight of hand card tricks and easy manner before asking if we wanted to have a drink at a local bar. We were at the hour of clubs only, but said yes. Anyway, with curiosity and no hurry to be anywhere, knowing that there was always a party in the city if one were so inclined. The man took us to a darkened bar front, and taking out keys, explained that it was his bar. We entered, and spent the next few hours playing music on the surround sound and drinking specialty cocktails courtesy of our impromptu host. I would not go so far as to say that my father would have been proud, but he loved serendipity, and I think would have thought that an instance in which God was working in mysterious ways. Leaving the bar for a nightclub where we ran into another lone North American who also seemed unconcerned about where life had led her. I could hear her voice as I approached the bathroom, entered to find her sitting on a chair smoking a cigarette. What an odd place to sit, I mused, when I realized she was not waiting to use one of the many empty or revolving stalls. I sparked up conversation, and we spent the rest of the night in each other's company, cracking jokes and confronting people on their questionable life choices by comparing notes. She was leaving the next day back to the Bay Area, but she was one of 3 guests I invited to a friend's wedding in Mendocino, north of San Francisco. I saw her again recently with my son, and could not tell if much had changed in a short period of time, or if little had changed in a long period of time. 10 years is a long enough period of time to have a moniker as a milestone, but a decade is still only relevant in its relativity. I suppose that the next time I see her, I will have to ask her what she thinks. Seeking solace and a sense of grounding, I found refuge in the apartment of a friend away from Berlin and south in Bavaria. Here, amidst the familiarity of a quiet space, I allowed myself the luxury of slowing down. I spent days making meals with care, sleeping deeply, immersing myself in books that offered solace, and detoxing from the excesses of the balmy Berlin nights. It was in this space of tranquility and reprieve that I finally allowed myself to confront the ashes. Sitting in meditation and reflection, I faced the weight of their significance and the emotions they stirred within me. The stillness of the apartment provided a canvas for introspection, allowing me to sift through the layers of my experiences and emotions. As I engaged in this process, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The ability to re regulate my nervous system and circadian rhythm became a necessary and healing act. It was a moment of recalibration, a return to myself after being swept away by the whirlwind of Berlin. In Munich, amidst the quietude and simplicity, and almost coldness and sterility, I found the space to honor my father's memory and the significance of his ashes. It was a period of necessary detoxification, both physically and emotionally, allowing me to shed the weight of the past and embrace the present with a renewed sense of clarity and purpose. This pause in the journey became a pivotal moment of healing and reconnection, setting the stage for the next chapter of my unfolding path.